The red mud came at Helena Jarvis like a living thing, churning down the narrow canyon with the sound of 1,000 stampeding cattle. She pressed her back against the rock wall as the water rose past her ankles, then her knees, the cold shocking her system even in the August heat of 1883. The sky above the canyon rim had turned dark purple an hour ago, and she had been foolish enough to think she could outrun the storm. Now the floodwater trapped her in a crevice barely wide enough for her body, the current already tugging at her legs with fingers that promised to drag her away and drown her in the muddy surge. Helena had been tracking her father's missing mare for 3 hours before the storm hit, following hoofprints through the arroyos and canyons northeast of Calico, California. The mining town sat in the Mojave Desert where rain rarely fell, but when it did, it transformed dry washes into deadly torrents within minutes. Her father had warned her about flash floods 100 times, but the mare was pregnant and valuable, and Helena refused to lose her to the wilderness. Now she might lose her own life instead. The water reached her waist, pressing her harder against the canyon wall. She could feel the current's power, could see debris rushing past in the brown surge. A dead mesquite bush tumbled by, followed by what looked like part of a wooden crate. The canyon walls rose 30 feet on either side, too smooth to climb, too steep to escape. Helena tried to move sideways along the rock face, searching for higher ground, but the current knocked her feet from under her. She grabbed at the rock, her fingers finding a small crack that barely held her weight. Her arms burned with effort. The water kept rising. It reached her chest, then her shoulders. Helena tilted her head back, gasping for air, watching the gray sky disappear behind the brown water that now lapped at her chin. She thought of her mother, dead these past 5 years, and wondered if she would see her again soon. She thought of her father, who would blame himself for her death, who would never forgive himself for letting her go out alone. She thought of all the things she would never do, never see, never become. Then she heard the horse. The sound came from upstream, hooves splashing through water, a man's voice shouting something she could not understand. Helena craned her neck, trying to see through the spray and mist, but the canyon curved and blocked her view. The water covered her mouth now. She stretched onto her toes, lifting her face to grab another breath, but she knew she had seconds left, maybe less. The horse burst around the canyon bend like something from a fever dream. A massive buckskin gelding, chest deep in the current, fighting against the flood with every stride. The rider sat tall in the saddle, a man in a dark coat and hat, and he had a rope in his hands. He was shouting at her, but the water roared too loud for her to hear the words. Helena saw him building a loop, saw him urging his horse closer even as the current threatened to sweep them both away. The rope sailed through the air. Helena released her handhold and grabbed for it, but the current immediately pulled her under. Water filled her nose and mouth, brown and gritty, tasting of earth and sage. She tumbled in the surge, no longer certain which way was up, her lungs screaming for air. Then something tightened around her chest and she was being dragged, pulled through the water like a hooked fish. Her head broke the surface. She gasped and choked, coughing up muddy water, her vision blurred. The rope was around her torso, cinched tight under her arms, and she could feel herself being hauled against the current. She glimpsed the man on the horse, saw him braced in his stirrups with the rope wrapped around his saddle horn, saw the buckskin straining with every muscle to keep its footing. The horse lunged toward the canyon wall where the current was slightly weaker. The man shouted something that might have been encouragement or instruction. Helena tried to help, tried to swim or kick, but the water had stolen all her strength. She could only hold onto the rope and trust that this stranger would not let her die. They reached a place where the canyon widened, and a shelf of rock created a natural platform 6 feet above the flood. The man dismounted in one smooth motion, keeping hold of the rope, and pulled her toward the ledge. Helena's hands scraped against stone as she tried to find purchase. The man leaned down, grabbed her wrist with a grip like iron, and hauled her bodily out of the water. She collapsed on the rock shelf, coughing and shaking, her entire body trembling with cold and shock and exhaustion. The man knelt beside her, rolled her onto her side, and slapped her back hard enough to help her expel more water from her lungs. Helena retched and gasped, her throat burning, her eyes streaming. When she could finally breathe again, she rolled onto her back and looked up at her rescuer. He was younger than she had expected, maybe 25 or 26, with a lean, weathered face and eyes the color of storm clouds. His hat had been lost in the rescue, and his dark brown hair was plastered to his head. Water dripped from his coat and clothes, forming puddles around him. He was studying her with an intensity that made her suddenly aware of how she must look, soaked and bedraggled and half-drowned. "Can you breathe?" he asked. His voice was low and rough, marked with an accent she could not quite place. Not local, but not foreign either. Somewhere eastern, maybe. Helena nodded, not trusting her voice yet. She sat up slowly, wincing at the bruises she knew would bloom across her ribs where the rope had held her. The man stood and moved to his horse, checking the animal with gentle hands, murmuring words too soft for Helena to hear. The buckskin was trembling, its coat dark with water and sweat, but it seemed sound. "Thank you," Helena finally managed. Her voice came out as a croak. "You saved my life." The man glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You should not have been in the canyon during a storm." There was no anger in his words, just a statement of fact, but Helena felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment anyway. "I was tracking my father's mare. I did not think the rain would come so fast. Rain in the mountains can flood the desert in minutes." He untied the rope from his saddle and began coiling it with practiced efficiency. "Where is your horse?" Helena's stomach dropped. In the panic and terror of the flood, she had completely forgotten about Juniper, her steady gray mare. "I tied her upstream near the canyon entrance." "Oh God, the water! How far upstream?" "Maybe half a mile. There were some cottonwoods and the ground was higher there." Helena struggled to her feet, her legs shaking. "I have to find her." The man caught her arm as she swayed. "You are not going anywhere until the flood passes. If your horse had high ground, she will be fine. If she did not, there is nothing you can do for her now." The brutal honesty of his words stung, but Helena knew he was right. She looked out at the water still rushing through the canyon, slightly lower now than at its peak, but still deadly. The storm seemed to be passing, the dark clouds moving east, but sunset was coming and the desert would soon be cold. "What is your name?" Helena asked, studying the man more carefully. He wore the clothes of a working cowhand, practical and worn, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who spent more time with horses than people. His hands were scarred and calloused, his face tanned dark by the sun. A cowboy, she thought, but there was something different about him, something that set him apart from the drifters and ranch hands she had known all her life. "Decker Zane," he said. "I work for the Running J Ranch about 10 miles south of Calico." "I know the Running J." Helena wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in her soaked clothes. "Thomas Riggs owns it. He supplies beef to the mines." "That is right." Decker moved to the edge of the shelf and studied the water. "The flood is dropping. Another hour and we can move. Where are you from?" "Calico." "My father owns the livery stable there. I am Helena Jarvis." Something flickered in Decker's expression, so brief she almost missed it. Recognition, maybe, or surprise. But he only nodded and said, I know your father, good man, he will be worried about you. He does not know I left town." Helena looked down at her hands, scraped raw from the rocks. "I left a note saying I was checking the pasture. He probably has not even noticed I am gone yet. He will notice when you do not come home before dark." Decker glanced at the sky, measuring the remaining daylight. "We should reach Calico in 2 hours, maybe less if we push hard." "My father's mare," Helena said. "I cannot go back without finding her. You almost died looking for a horse." Decker's tone was sharp now, edged with something that might have been anger or exasperation. "Is any animal worth your life? She is pregnant with a foal worth $200. My father borrowed money to breed her to a champion stud from Los Angeles. If we lose her, we lose everything." Helena met his eyes, refusing to back down. "I will not go home until I find her." Decker stared at her for a long moment, and Helena could see him weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, he shook his head. "You are stubborn as a mule. I have been told that before. I believe it." He moved back to his horse and gathered the reins. "The mare could be anywhere in 20 square miles by now. How do you plan to find her in the dark?" "I will start where I last saw her tracks and work from there. She was heading east, toward the old silver claims." Helena squeezed water from her braid, trying to wring out some of the weight. "I am not asking you to help me. You already did more than anyone could expect, but I have to try." Decker was quiet for a moment, running his hand along his horse's neck. The buckskin nudged his shoulder, and he produced a piece of something from his pocket that the horse lipped up gently. "What does this mare look like?" "Dark bay, about 15 hands, white star on her forehead. She has a small scar on her left shoulder from a barbed wire fence." Hope bloomed in Helena's chest. "Why?" "Because I saw a horse matching that description about 2 miles east of here, just before the storm hit." Decker swung into his saddle with easy grace. "She was moving fast, heading toward Red Rock Canyon. If she found shelter there, she might still be close." Helena felt tears prickle at her eyes, though whether from relief or gratitude or simple exhaustion, she could not say. "You will help me look. The running jay can spare me for 1 night." He reached down, offering his hand. "But if we do not find her by full dark, we head back to Calico. I will not have your death on my conscience, even if you seem determined to get yourself killed." Helena took his hand and let him pull her up behind the saddle. The buckskin shifted under the added weight, but did not protest. She settled herself on the horse's rump, gripping the back of the saddle, acutely aware of how close she was to Decker Zane. She could smell horse and leather and something else, something clean like sage soap. "What is your horse's name?" she asked as they started moving, the gelding picking his way carefully along the rock shelf toward higher ground. "Copper," Decker said. "He is 8 years old and probably the smartest horse I have ever known. He is the one who heard you in the canyon. I would have ridden past if he had not stopped and refused to move." Helena leaned forward slightly to pat Copper's wet shoulder. "Then I owe both of you my life." Decker did not respond, but she felt him shift in the saddle, and she wondered what he was thinking. The floodwater had receded enough for Copper to navigate a path up the canyon wall, his hooves finding purchase on rocks and roots. They climbed out of the canyon as the last light drained from the sky, emerging onto a flat stretch of desert scrub dotted with creosote bushes and kala cactus. The storm had passed completely now, leaving the air clean and cool and smelling of wet earth, that rare desert perfume that came only after rain. Stars began to appear overhead, brilliant in the clear sky. A crescent moon hung low in the west, offering just enough light to see by. Decker turned Copper east, toward Red Rock Canyon, and urged him into a steady trot. Helena held onto the saddle and tried not to think about how improper this was, riding double with a man she had just met. her clothes soaked and clinging to her body. But propriety seemed absurd given that he had just saved her from drowning. She focused instead on scanning the darkening landscape for any sign of the missing mare. They rode in silence for a while, Copper's hoofbeats rhythmic and soothing. Helena found herself relaxing despite her worry, lulled by the motion and the warmth of Decker's back in front of her. She had been cold in her wet clothes, but his body blocked the wind, and slowly she stopped shivering. "How long have you worked for the running jay?" she asked, more to stay awake than from real curiosity. 3 months, Decker said. "I came west from Kansas in the spring." "Kansas is a long way. What brought you to California?" He was quiet for so long that Helena thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I needed a new start." Sometimes a man has to leave his past behind and begin again. There was pain in those words, carefully controlled but present nonetheless. Helena wanted to ask more, wanted to know what had driven him west, but the set of his shoulders told her he would not welcome questions. So instead she said, "The running jay is a good outfit. Mr. Riggs is fair and he treats his men well." "He does." Decker pointed ahead toward a dark mass rising from the desert floor. "Red Rock Canyon. If your mare found shelter, it would be in there." The canyon was smaller than the one that had nearly killed Helena, more of a series of rocky outcrops and shallow caves than true canyon walls. Decker slowed Copper to a walk and began calling out, a low musical whistle that carried across the still night air. They waited, listening, but heard nothing except the distant yip of a coyote. Decker tried again, the whistle slightly different this time, and Helena realized he was mimicking horse communication. Clever, she thought. Smarter than shouting and potentially spooking a nervous mare. They moved deeper into the rocks, Copper picking his way carefully over stones still slick from the rain. Then they heard it, an answering whinny, nervous but clear. "There," Helena breathed, pointing toward a dark alcove between 2 red boulders. Decker urged Copper forward, and the buckskin nickered softly as they approached. The bay mare stepped out of the shadows, ears pricked forward, clearly relieved to see other horses. "Oh, thank God," Helena said, sliding off Copper before they had fully stopped. She approached the mare slowly, hands outstretched, murmuring soft reassurances. The mare snorted and stamped but allowed Helena to reach her. A quick examination showed no serious injuries, just some scrapes and a tear in her halter where she must have pulled free from wherever Helena had tied her. Most importantly, the mare's belly was still round and firm, the foal apparently undisturbed by her adventure. "Is she sound?" Decker asked from atop Copper. "She seems to be." Helena ran her hands down each of the mare's legs, checking for heat or swelling. Nothing broken, nothing torn. She was lucky. "We are all lucky tonight." Decker dismounted and approached the mare, letting her sniff his hand before he examined her himself. His touch was gentle and professional, the hands of someone who truly understood horses. "She is dehydrated and tired, but she will be fine. We should walk her back slowly, let her rest often." "It will take hours to get back to Calico," Helena said, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Her brush with death was catching up to her now that the immediate crisis had passed, and her legs felt like water. "There is a line shack about 3 miles south of here." Decker was studying her face in the moonlight, his expression concerned. "It belongs to the running jay, but no one is using it right now. We can rest there until dawn, then head back in the daylight." Helena knew she should refuse, knew that spending the night alone with a man would ruin her reputation if anyone found out. But the alternative was trying to walk for hours in wet clothes in the dark, and she simply did not have the strength. Besides, Decker Zane had already proven himself trustworthy. He had risked his life to save hers without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. She could trust him for one night. "All right," she said. "Thank you." They walked south through the desert, leading both horses, moving slowly to spare the tired mare. The night grew colder, and Helena's wet clothes became torture against her skin. She hugged herself and kept walking, teeth chattering, determined not to complain. Decker noticed anyway. Without a word, he shrugged out of his coat and draped it around her shoulders. "You are wet too," Helena protested, but he shook his head. "I will be fine. You are smaller and you were in the water longer. Take it." The coat was heavy and warm, still holding his body heat, and Helena pulled it around herself gratefully. It smelled like him, that sage soap scent mixed with leather and horse and something uniquely human. She should not notice such things, she thought. She should not be so aware of him walking beside her, should not keep stealing glances at his profile in the moonlight. But she was aware, very aware, and she could not quite regret it. The lined shack appeared after what felt like an eternity of walking, a small wooden structure barely larger than a shed. Decker produced a key from his pocket and unlocked the door, then helped Helena inside before returning to tend the horses. She stood in the darkness, shivering, until she heard him moving around outside. A moment later, golden light spilled through the doorway as he lit a lantern. The shack was sparse but clean. A single bunk bed, a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves holding basic supplies. Decker brought the lantern inside and immediately began building a fire in the stove, his movements efficient from long practice. Within minutes, flames crackled behind the iron grate, promising warmth. "There should be blankets in the trunk," Decker said, pointing to a wooden chest in the corner. "And I think there are some dry clothes, just basic work shirts and trousers. You need to get out of those wet things before you catch pneumonia." Helena opened the trunk and found what he had described, along with some tinned food and a coffee pot. She pulled out a rough wool blanket and a shirt that would hang to her knees. "Turn around," she said, and Decker immediately faced the wall, his back rigid with propriety. Helena peeled off her sodden clothes as quickly as her shaking hands would allow. Everything was soaked through, including her undergarments, and she felt indecent standing there naked in a room with a man just feet away. But she forced herself to move quickly, pulling on the dry shirt and wrapping herself in the blanket. The shirt smelled of campfire smoke and someone else's sweat, but it was dry and that was all that mattered. "All right," she said, and Decker turned back around. His eyes swept over her briefly, just long enough to confirm she was covered, then moved away. Was she imagining it, or had color risen in his cheeks? "Your turn," Helena said, moving to face the wall as he had done. She heard him moving, the rustle of wet cloth being removed, and she forced herself not to peek. She stared at a knot in the wood wall and thought about nothing at all until he said she could turn around. He had changed into dry trousers and kept his undershirt on, though it was still damp. He hung their wet clothes near the stove to dry, and then busied himself making coffee with the supplies from the trunk. Helena sank onto one of the chairs and pulled the blanket tighter, watching him move around the small space. The firelight cast shadows across his face, emphasizing the sharp lines of his jaw and cheekbones. "You are very calm for someone who almost died today," Decker said, glancing at her as he set the coffee pot on the stove. "I think I am too tired to panic," Helena admitted. "It will probably hit me tomorrow." "Probably." He found 2 tin cups and set them on the table, then pulled the other chair closer to the stove and gestured for her to move nearer to the heat. She did, and he sat across from her, the small space feeling even smaller now that they were both still and seated and looking at each other. "Tell me about the running jay," Helena said, wanting to fill the silence. "What do you do there, whatever needs doing?" "I am decent with horses, so mostly I work with the remuda breaking colts and training working horses. Sometimes I ride fence or help move cattle." Decker leaned back in his chair, his eyes on the fire. "It is good work, honest work. You said you came from Kansas. Did you work with horses there too?" His expression closed slightly. "My family had a farm. We raised horses and some cattle. I grew up in the saddle." "And your family?" Helena asked gently. "Are they still in Kansas? My parents are dead." The words were flat, emotionless. "My mother died when I was 12. My father passed last winter. There was nothing keeping me there after that." "I am sorry." Helena wished she had not asked. "My mother died 5 years ago, fever. It was fast at least. She did not suffer long." Decker looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them in that moment. A recognition of shared grief, shared loss. The understanding that came from knowing what it meant to lose someone irreplaceable. "It changes you," he said softly. "Losing someone like that." "Yes," Helena agreed. "It does." The coffee began to boil, and Decker poured it into the tin cups, strong and black and bitter. Helena wrapped her hands around the cup and sipped carefully, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. They sat in companionable silence for a while, drinking coffee and listening to the fire crackle. "Why were you out in the storm?" Helena asked eventually. "You said you saw my father's mare before the rain hit. What were you doing out there? Looking for strays?" Decker cradled his cup in both hands, his long fingers wrapped around the battered tin. "We had 3 calves wander off from the south pasture. I was tracking them when the storm came up. I found them sheltering in a wash and was heading back when Copper heard you in the canyon." "So you were in danger too. You risked the flood to save me," he shrugged. "Could not just leave you there." "Most men would have." Helena held his gaze. "Most men would have told themselves there was nothing they could do, that it was too dangerous to try, but you did not hesitate." "You were drowning." Decker said it as if that explained everything, as if there had been no choice to make. "What kind of man would I be if I rode past and let you die? A practical one, a safe one." Helena set down her cup. "Instead, you are a brave one, a good one." He looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what needed doing." They talked long into the night, the conversation flowing easier as exhaustion lowered their guards. Helena told him about growing up in Calico, about the mining boom that had transformed the desert into a bustling town of 3,000 people, seemingly overnight. She told him about her father's livery stable, how they had arrived when the town was just a collection of tents and claim stakes, how they had built a business from nothing. She told him about the mare, about her father's dream of breeding quality horses that could command real prices from the mine owners and merchants getting rich on silver. Decker listened more than he talked, but gradually he opened up as well. He spoke of Kansas, of endless wheat fields and brutal winters, of a father who drank too much after his wife died, and a son who tried to hold a failing farm together. He spoke of drought and debt, of watching everything his parents built get sold at auction, of the relief mixed with guilt when his father finally passed and freed him from obligation. He spoke of pointing his horse west and not looking back, of the strange freedom of being nobody in a place where nobody knew his name. "Do you miss it?" Helena asked. "Kansas, I mean, your home." "I miss what it was before my mother died," Decker said, "but what it became after, no. That place had nothing left for me." He met her eyes across the small space. "What about you? Have you ever wanted to leave Calico?" "Sometimes," Helena admitted. "When my mother was alive, she used to talk about San Francisco. She said it was a real city with theaters and libraries and restaurants that served food from all over the world. She wanted to take me there someday." Helena smiled sadly. "But then she died, and it was just my father and me. He needs me here. The business needs me. so I stay. Does he know how close he came to losing you today? No, and I would appreciate it if you did not tell him. Helena pulled the blanket tighter. He already worries too much. If he knew what happened, he would never let me leave town alone again. Maybe he should not. Decker's voice was gentle but firm. The desert is not forgiving, Helena. Today you got lucky, next time you might not. I know. She did know, could still feel the water closing over her head, the terror of drowning in mud and debris, but I cannot live my whole life afraid. I cannot stay locked in town like a child. There is a difference between caution and fear. Decker stood and moved to check their clothes by the stove. Helena's dress was still damp, but her undergarments had dried enough to wear. He handed them to her without meeting her eyes. You can use the blanket as a screen. Helena changed quickly behind the blanket, grateful for the dry undergarments even if her dress was still uncomfortable. When she emerged, Decker was pulling on his own shirt, now mostly dry. He had been wearing it for hours, she realized, even though it was damp so that she could have the blanket. You should sleep, he said, gesturing to the bunk. It will be dawn in a few hours and we have a long ride back to Calico. What about you? I will take the floor. I have slept on worse. Helena wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a weight. She climbed onto the narrow bunk, still wrapped in the blanket, and lay down. The mattress was thin and lumpy, but after the day she had endured, it felt like luxury. Decker extinguished the lantern, leaving only the soft glow of the fire, and settled himself on the floor with his saddle as a pillow. Decker, Helena said into the darkness. Yes, thank you for everything. Go to sleep, Helena. She smiled and closed her eyes, listening to the fire crackle and the wind whisper outside. Despite everything, despite the terror and exhaustion and impropriety, she felt safe, protected. Because of the man sleeping on the floor a few feet away. A man she had known for only a handful of hours, but who had already changed her life. Helena drifted off to sleep, wondering what that meant. She woke to pale gray light filtering through the gaps in the walls, and the smell of coffee. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was or why she was sleeping in her clothes. Then it all came rushing back. The flood, the canyon, Decker pulling her from the water. She sat up quickly and saw him crouched by the stove, tending a fresh fire. Morning, he said without turning around. We should leave soon if you want to get home before your father sends out a search party. Helena's stomach clenched with guilt and worry. Her father would have realized she was gone by now, would be frantic with concern. What time is it? Just after dawn, maybe 5 o'clock. Decker poured coffee and brought it to her, along with a piece of hardtack from the supplies. It is not much of a breakfast, but it will have to do. They ate quickly and in silence, both aware of the need to hurry. Helena braided her hair, trying to make herself presentable, though she knew she looked like exactly what she was, a woman who had spent the night away from home. Her dress was wrinkled and stained with mud, her hands scratched and bruised. There would be no hiding what had happened, no pretending she had simply been delayed. Outside, the desert sparkled in the early light, every plant and rock washed clean by the storm. The air was cool and fresh, and the eastern sky glowed pink and gold. Copper and the bay mare stood where Decker had picketed them, both rested and ready to travel. Decker saddled Copper while Helena checked the mare one more time, reassuring herself that both horse and unborn foal had survived their ordeal. She can be ridden for short distances, Decker said, examining the mare's legs, but we should still walk most of the way. Let her take it easy. You ride Copper and lead her. What about you? I will walk. I am used to it. He helped her into the saddle, his hand steady on her waist, and handed her the mare's lead rope. Then they set out south toward Calico, Copper walking steadily while Decker strode alongside. The desert unfolded around them in shades of rust and gold, alive with birds and small creatures emerging after the rain. Normally, Helena would have enjoyed the walk, would have taken time to appreciate the rare beauty of the desert after a storm. But anxiety gnawed at her, worry about her father's reaction, about what people would say when they learned she had spent the night with Decker Zane. "What will you tell your father?" Decker asked, as if reading her thoughts. "The truth," Helena said. "That I was caught in the flood, that you saved my life, that we took shelter to wait for morning. He will understand. And everyone else." Helena was quiet for a moment. "Others will talk no matter what I say. That is the nature of small towns. But I know what happened, and you know what happened, and that is all that matters. I am sorry if I caused you trouble. You saved my life." Helena looked down at him, this man who had risked everything for a stranger. Anyone who would criticize that can go straight to hell. A slight smile tugged at Decker's mouth, the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges, and Helena felt her breath catch. He was handsome when he smiled, she realized. More than handsome. Beautiful in the way that wild things were beautiful, untamed and dangerous and utterly captivating. "Stop it," she told herself firmly. "You barely know him. This is just gratitude, nothing more." But even as she thought it, she knew it was not quite true. They reached Calico just after 7 in the morning as the town was waking up. Miners were heading to their claims, merchants opening their shops, women hanging laundry in the dry air. People turned to stare as they passed, and Helena could see the curiosity and speculation in their eyes. She kept her head high and ignored them, focused on getting home. Her father was standing in front of the livery stable, talking to 2 men she recognized as ranch hands from one of the local spreads. He looked haggard and worried, his gray hair uncombed, his clothes rumpled as if he had not slept. When he saw her, his face went through a series of emotions: relief, anger, fear, and finally settling on a complicated mixture of all 3. "Helena," he said, his voice rough. "Thank God, where have you been? I have had people searching for you all night." Helena dismounted and led both horses forward. "I am sorry, Papa. I went to look for the mare and got caught in the flash flood. If Mr. Zane had not found me, I would have drowned." Her father's eyes moved to Decker, seeing him properly for the first time. "You saved my daughter." "I happened to be in the right place," Decker said simply. "She would have done the same for anyone. You rode into a flash flood to pull her out." Her father's voice shook slightly. "That takes more than just being in the right place. That takes courage and a good heart." He stepped forward and gripped Decker's hand, shaking it firmly. "Henry Jarvis, whatever I can do to repay you, you only have to name it." "No payment necessary," Decker said. "I am just glad she is safe." Henry turned back to his daughter, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "Do you need a doctor?" "I am fine, just tired and bruised." Helena handed him the mare's lead rope. "The mare is fine too. The foal seems undisturbed." Relief flooded her father's face. "I do not care about the damn horse. I care about you. When you did not come home last night, when I found your note and realized you had gone into the desert alone." He stopped, overcome, and pulled her into a fierce hug. "Do not ever scare me like that again." "I am sorry," Helena whispered against his shoulder. "I was foolish. I should have come back when I saw the storm." "Yes, you should have." Henry released her and stepped back, his hands on her shoulders. "But you are home now and safe. That is what matters." He looked at Decker again. "Where did you spend the night?" "The Running J-Line shack, south of Red Rock Canyon," Decker said. "It was the closest shelter." Henry nodded slowly, processing this information. Helena could see him working through the implications, understanding what it would mean for his daughter's reputation. But he only said, "You did right to get her out of the cold. Flash flood victims can die from exposure even after they get out of the water." "That is what I thought," Decker said. An awkward silence fell. The two ranch hands who had been helping search for Helena made their excuses and left, clearly eager to spread the gossip. Helena felt a flush of anger and embarrassment, knowing that by noon the entire town would know she had spent the night alone with a man. "I should get back to the running, Jay," Decker said. "Mr. Riggs will be wondering where I am." "Of course." Henry reached into his pocket and pulled out some coins. "At least let me pay for your time." "No," Decker's voice was firm. "I told you no payment necessary." "Then at least let me tend your horse. He must be exhausted after what you put him through." Decker hesitated, then nodded. "A rub down and some grain would be appreciated. Copper earned it. I will take care of him personally." Henry took Copper's reins and led the buckskin into the stable. The mare followed, leaving Helena and Decker standing alone in the dusty street. "I should go in and help," Helena said, but she did not move. "Yes," Decker agreed, but he did not move either. They stood there, looking at each other in the growing morning light, and Helena felt the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. She wanted to thank him again, wanted to tell him that she could not stop thinking about him, wanted to ask if she would see him again. But the words stuck in her throat. "If you ever need anything," Decker finally said, "you can find me at the Running Jay. And if you are ever in town, you know where the livery is." Helena managed a smile. "We always have fresh coffee and Papa makes the best biscuits in Calico." "I will remember that." Decker touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that felt both formal and strangely intimate. "Take care of yourself, Helena Jarvis. You too, Decker Zane." He turned and walked into the stable, and Helena forced herself to turn away, to walk to the small house behind the livery where she and her father lived. But she looked back once, just once, and saw him standing in the stable doorway watching her. Their eyes met across the distance, and something passed between them again, that same strange connection she had felt in the lined shack. Then her father called his name, and Decker disappeared into the shadows of the stable, and Helena went inside her house to clean up and change and try to pretend that her life had not just fundamentally shifted. Over the following days, Helena discovered that small-town gossip was every bit as vicious as she had feared. Women whispered behind their hands when she passed. Men gave her knowing looks that made her skin crawl. The story of her rescue had spread and grown in the telling, becoming more scandalous with each repetition. Some versions had her deliberately luring Decker to the lined shack. Others suggested they had been meeting secretly for weeks. The truth, that he had saved her life and behaved with perfect propriety, seemed to interest no one. Helena held her head high and ignored them all. Her father stood by her fiercely, confronting anyone who dared suggest impropriety within his hearing. But she could see the worry in his eyes, the concern that she had been compromised, that her reputation was damaged perhaps beyond repair. "Let them talk," he said one evening over dinner, nearly a week after her rescue. "They will find something new to gossip about soon enough. I know." Helena pushed food around her plate, not hungry. "I just hate that Decker is being dragged into this. He did not ask for any of it. Has he been back to town?" Her father's tone was carefully neutral. "No." Helena had been watching for him, though she would not admit it. Every time a rider approached the stable, every time she heard hoofbeats in the street, her heart jumped, but it was never him. "I suppose he is busy with his work, or avoiding the gossip." Her father reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Give it time, honey, this will blow over." But it did not blow over, not entirely. 2 weeks after the flood, Helena was walking home from the general store when 3 women deliberately crossed to the other side of the street to avoid her. She recognized them from church, respectable wives of mine foremen and merchants. Their snub was obvious and cruel, and Helena felt tears of anger and humiliation prick her eyes. She was still upset when she reached the stable and found a strange horse tied outside, a rangy sorrel with the running J brand. Her heart leaped even before she saw Decker standing in the stable yard talking to her father. He had his hat in his hands and was speaking earnestly, though Helena could not hear the words. Her father was nodding, his expression thoughtful. They both turned when they heard her approach. Decker's eyes swept over her, and she saw something flicker in their gray depths. Concern, maybe, or sympathy. Had he heard about the gossip? Of course he had. Everyone had heard. "Miss Jarvis," he said formally, nodding his head. "Mr. Zane." Helena's voice came out steadier than she felt. "This is a surprise. I needed to speak with your father." He glanced at Henry, who nodded encouragingly. "But now that you are here, I would like to speak with you as well, if you have a few minutes." "Of course." Helena set down her basket of groceries. "Would you like to come inside? I can make coffee." "Actually, I was hoping you might take a walk with me." Decker put his hat back on. "If that is all right with your father." Henry was watching them both with interest, and Helena could see him trying to hide a smile. "I think that would be fine." "Stay where people can see you, though, for propriety's sake." They walked toward the edge of town, where Calico faded into desert and the nearest buildings were far enough away to give them privacy while still being visible to anyone who cared to look. Neither spoke at first, both seemingly content to just walk side by side. Helena was acutely aware of him next to her, of his long stride that she had to hurry to match, of his hands clasped behind his back, as if he was stopping himself from reaching for her. "I heard about the talk," Decker finally said. "I am sorry, I never meant to cause you trouble. It is not your fault. You saved my life." Helena stopped walking and turned to face him. "People would gossip no matter what happened. That is what small-minded people do." Still, his jaw was tight with suppressed anger. "They should not be treating you this way. You did nothing wrong." "Neither did you." Helena studied his face, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands had curled into fists. "Is that why you came back? To apologize for something that is not your fault?" "No." Decker took a breath, seemed to steel himself for something. "I came back because I have not been able to stop thinking about you. Because every day for the past 2 weeks, I have wanted to ride into town and see you, but I was afraid I would make things worse. Because I finally realized that I do not care what people say, I needed to see you again." Helena's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "You have been thinking about me, constantly." He took a step closer, his eyes locked on hers. "Helena, I know we barely know each other. I know this is fast and probably foolish. But that night in the line shack, talking to you, I felt something I have not felt in years. Connection. Understanding. Like I had finally found someone who saw the world the way I do." "I felt it too," Helena whispered. "I thought I was imagining it. You were not." Decker reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. "I spoke to your father before you arrived. I asked his permission to court you properly. He said yes, but only if you wanted it too." Helena felt like she was floating, like her feet had left the ground. "You want to court me, if you will have me." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, the touch sending shivers up her arm. "I do not have much to offer. I am just a cowhand with no family and no prospects beyond my next paycheck. But I am honest and I work hard, and I swear I will treat you with the respect and care you deserve. Decker." Helena squeezed his hand, her eyes stinging with tears. "I do not care that you are a cowhand. I do not care that you have no family or money. What I care about is that you are brave and kind and good. What I care about is that when I am with you, I feel like I can breathe for the first time in years." His face lit up with a smile that transformed him completely, and Helena realized she would do anything to see that smile again. "Is that a yes?" "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course, yes." Decker pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Helena rested her head against his chest and listened to his heart hammering beneath his shirt. They stood there in the desert sunshine, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, and for the first time since her mother died, Helena felt truly happy. "People will still talk," she murmured against his shirt. "Let them." Decker's arms tightened around her. "I do not care what they say as long as I have you." They walked back to town hand in hand, no longer trying to hide their connection. Let people see, Helena thought. Let them know that Decker Zane was courting her, that she had chosen him and he had chosen her. By the time they reached the livery, word had already spread. Helena could feel eyes on them from every direction, could imagine the fresh wave of gossip spreading through Calico like wildfire. Her father was grinning when they entered the stable. "I take it she said yes." "She did," Decker confirmed, his hand still clasped around Helena's. "Good." Henry wiped his hands on his apron and moved to shake Decker's hand. "You will take care of her." "I will," Decker promised. "You have my word." "That is all I need." Henry turned to his daughter. "Your mother would have liked him. She always said you needed someone who could match your stubbornness." Helena felt tears prick her eyes at the mention of her mother. "You think she would approve?" "I know she would." Henry pulled her into a hug. "Be happy, honey. That is all she ever wanted for you." Over the following weeks, Decker rode into Calico every chance he got. Sometimes he could only stay for an hour between his duties at the Running Jay, just long enough for coffee and conversation. Other times he spent the whole day in town, helping Henry at the stable and stealing moments alone with Helena whenever they could. They walked together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories and dreams and fears. Helena discovered that Decker was quieter than she had first thought, more inclined to listen than talk, but when he did speak, it was with careful consideration. He was thoughtful and attentive, remembering small details she mentioned and surprising her with little gestures. Once he brought her a smooth stone he had found that was the exact color of her eyes. Another time he showed up with wildflowers that had bloomed after the rain, rare and precious in the desert. She learned that he loved horses with a passion that bordered on obsession, that he could spend hours working with a difficult colt and never lose his patience. She learned that he read poetry when he thought no one was watching, that he carried a battered book of Walt Whitman in his saddlebag. She learned that his father's drinking had been worse than he first admitted, that there were scars on his back from beatings he had endured as a boy trying to protect his mother. "I swore I would never be like him," Decker told her one evening as they sat on the stable fence watching the sunset. "I have not touched liquor since I left Kansas. I will not become the thing I hated most." Helena took his hand and pressed it against her cheek. "You could never be like him. You are the kindest man I have ever known." "I was not always kind." His voice was low and pained. "When I was younger, after my mother died, I was so angry. I got into fights, made trouble. My father beat me for it, which just made me angrier. It was a vicious cycle, and I could not see a way out." "What changed?" "A man named Samuel Cooper. He was a horse trainer passing through our county, and my father hired him to work with our colts. Samuel saw what was happening at home, saw the bruises I tried to hide. He took me aside one day and told me that I had a choice. I could let my father's cruelty turn me into the same kind of man, or I could decide to be better. He said anger was poison and the only cure was to let it go." "That is easier said than done," Helena said softly. "It took years." Decker's fingers intertwined with hers. But I worked at it. Every time I felt rage building, I would go work with the horses. They do not respond to anger, only to patience and consistency. They taught me how to be calm, how to control myself. By the time my father died, I had forgiven him. Not because he deserved it, but because I needed to be free of him. Helena leaned her head on his shoulder, marveling at his strength. To survive what he had survived and still be gentle, still be kind, that took a kind of courage most people never knew. "You are remarkable," she said. "You know that. I am just a man trying to do better than his raising." But she could hear the pleasure in his voice, could feel him relax against her. They sat there as the sky turned orange and purple and finally deep blue, watching the stars emerge one by one. Helena felt a peace settle over her that she had not known since her mother died. This, she thought, this is what happiness feels like. This connection, this ease, this sense of being exactly where she belonged. "Helena," Decker said eventually, his voice serious. "I need to tell you something, and you are not going to like it." She tensed, pulling back to look at his face. "What is it?" "Thomas Riggs wants me to go up to his north pasture and oversee the autumn roundup. It is about 60 miles from here, up near Barstow. I will be gone for at least 3 weeks, maybe a month." Helena's heart sank. A month without seeing him, without talking to him, felt impossible, but she forced herself to nod. "When do you leave?" "Day after tomorrow." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "I tried to get out of it, but I am the best rider he has. He needs me up there." "I understand." And she did, even though she hated it. Ranch work was seasonal and demanding, and Decker had obligations. "You will come see me before you go. I will be here tomorrow evening. And Helena." He leaned forward and kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting with tears. "I will think about you every day I am gone. I will count the hours until I can come back to you. I will think about you too." She turned her face and kissed his palm, bold in a way she would never have been a month ago. "Be safe up there." "I will." He held her close for another moment, then reluctantly pulled away. "I should get back to the ranch. It is a long ride in the dark." Helena watched him leave, his sorrel horse carrying him north into the darkness, and felt the first real ache of separation. She had known him less than 2 months, and already the thought of weeks without seeing him felt unbearable. Was this love? She wondered. This constant wanting, this sense of incompleteness when he was not near. She thought it might be. The next evening, Decker came to town as promised. He helped Henry close up the stable for the night. Then he and Helena took their usual walk to the edge of town. The gossip had died down some in the weeks since he started courting her openly. People had accepted that their relationship was real and proper, that Helena Jarvis was being courted by a decent man who treated her with respect. Some still whispered, but Helena had learned to ignore them. "I have something for you," Decker said when they stopped at their usual spot, far enough from town for privacy, but close enough to satisfy propriety. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Helena unwrapped it carefully and found a delicate silver chain with a small turquoise pendant. The stone was the color of desert sky, polished smooth and set in simple silver wire. It was beautiful and understated and perfect. "Decker, this is too much," she protested, but he shook his head. "I bought it from a Navajo trader who came through the ranch last week. The moment I saw it, I thought of you." He took the necklace and fastened it around her neck, his fingers gentle against her skin. "I want you to wear it while I am gone, so you remember that I am thinking of you." Helena touched the stone, warm from his hands. "I love it, thank you, Helena." He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "These past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. I know we have not been courting long, and maybe this is too fast, but I need you to know something before I leave." Her heart was pounding again. "What?" I love you." The words were simple and direct, no flourish or poetry, just truth laid bare. "I think I have loved you since the moment I pulled you from that flood. I love your strength and your stubbornness, and the way you refuse to let anyone make you feel small. I love the way you laugh and the way you think, and the way you make me want to be a better man. I love you, and I needed you to know that before I left." Helena felt tears spill down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you too. I think I have been waiting my whole life to find you." Decker kissed her then, really kissed her for the first time, his lips soft and warm against hers. Helena's hands found their way to his chest, feeling his heart racing as fast as her own. The kiss was sweet and tender and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless. "When I come back," Decker said, his forehead resting against hers, "I am going to ask your father for your hand. I want to marry you, Helena Jarvis. I want to build a life with you. Will you think about that while I am gone?" "I do not need to think about it." Helena rose on her toes and kissed him again. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He laughed, the sound full of joy and relief, and spun her around in a circle. They stood there in the desert twilight, holding each other and making promises for the future. And Helena felt certain that her life had just begun. Decker left the next morning before dawn, and the weeks that followed felt impossibly long. Helena threw herself into work at the stable, helping her father with the horses, managing the books, doing anything to keep busy. The bay mare they had rescued was thriving, her belly huge now with the foal that would come in another month. Every time Helena looked at the mare, she thought of Decker, of the flood and the rescue and everything that had followed. 3 weeks into his absence, a man rode into Calico on a lathered horse, asking for the doctor. There had been an accident up near Barstow, he said. A stampede during the roundup. Several men injured, one dead. Helena's blood turned to ice as she listened to the details, but the man did not mention Decker by name. She told herself that meant he was fine, that if he had been hurt or killed, someone would have said so, but the fear gnawed at her. She sent a letter north with the next male rider, begging for news. Days passed with no reply. Helena tried to stay calm, tried to tell herself that no news was good news, but her imagination conjured terrible scenarios. She dreamed of stampeding cattle and broken bodies, of Decker lying hurt and alone with no one to help him. Finally, nearly 4 weeks after he had left, Helena looked up from mucking a stall and saw him riding down Calico's main street. He was thinner, his face dark with sun and shadow, but he was whole and alive and real. Helena dropped her pitchfork and ran to him, not caring who saw, not caring about propriety. She reached him just as he was dismounting, and he caught her in his arms and held her tight. "I am all right," he murmured into her hair. "I am all right, love, I am here. I heard about the stampede. I thought," her voice broke. "I was so afraid." "I know, I am sorry. I tried to send word, but the male rider had already left." He pulled back enough to look at her face, his thumb wiping away her tears. "I was not hurt. Tom Cooper broke his leg and we lost a good horse, but everyone else was fine." Relief made Helena's legs weak. Thank God you are safe." Her father had emerged from the stable and was watching them with a knowing smile. "I will take care of your horse, son. You two go on and catch up." They walked to their usual spot, hand in hand, and Decker told her about the past month. The work had been hard and dangerous, driving several hundred head of cattle down from the high pastures, branding calves, culling the herd. The stampede had happened on the last day, triggered by a rattlesnake that spooked the lead steer. Tom Cooper had been thrown from his horse when the animal panicked, and Decker had been the one to ride into the stampede and turn the herd before anyone else was killed. "It was the most terrifying thing I have ever done," he admitted. Worse than the flood, worse than anything. But I kept thinking of you, of coming back to you, and that gave me courage. You could have been killed, Helena said, her throat tight. But I was not. He took both her hands in his. And now I am back, and I have something to ask you. He knelt in the dust right there, in their spot at the edge of town, with the desert stretching out around them and the stars beginning to appear overhead. From his pocket he produced a simple gold band, worn smooth with age. "This was my mother's ring," he said. "It is the only thing I kept from Kansas, the only thing I could not bear to sell. Helena Jarvis, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and partner and the keeper of my heart?" Helena was crying again, but these were tears of joy. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit as if it had been made for her. Then he stood and kissed her, and Helena felt like she was flying, like she could drift up into the darkening sky and never come down. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Calico. Helena wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and carried wildflowers that Decker had picked that morning. Her father walked her down the aisle with tears streaming down his face, and Decker stood at the altar looking as nervous as she had ever seen him. The ceremony was brief, just the essential words and vows. Helena promised to love and honor Decker for the rest of her life, and he promised the same to her. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Decker kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sniffled into their handkerchiefs. Thomas Riggs had given Decker 3 days off for the wedding, and they spent their wedding night in the same lined shack where they had sheltered after the flood. Decker had ridden out earlier in the week to prepare it, bringing blankets and food and candles. When they arrived at sunset, Helena found that he had transformed the humble space into something magical. Wildflowers in tin cans, candles casting soft light, a real pillow and clean sheets on the narrow bunk. "Decker," she breathed, looking around in wonder. "This is beautiful. I wanted our first night as husband and wife to be special." He helped her down from copper, his hands lingering on her waist. "I know it is not much," but Helena silenced him with a kiss. "It is perfect. You are perfect." They made love slowly and carefully, learning each other's bodies, murmuring words of love and reassurance. Helena had been nervous, knowing only the vague facts that married women whispered about, but Decker was patient and gentle, putting her pleasure before his own. When it was over, they lay tangled together in the narrow bunk, skin against skin, listening to the desert night sounds outside. "I am so happy," Helena whispered. "I did not know I could feel this happy." Decker kissed her temple, his arm tightening around her. "Neither did I. For so long I thought I did not deserve happiness, that my father's sins had marked me somehow. But you make me believe in good things. You make me believe in myself. You are a good man." Helena traced patterns on his chest with her fingers. "The best man I have ever known." They talked late into the night, making plans and dreaming about their future. Decker had been saving his wages, and with Helena's small savings combined, they had enough to think about buying a piece of land. Nothing large, just a few acres where they could build a house and raise horses. It would take years of hard work, but they were both young and strong and willing. "I want to breed quality horses," Decker said. "Like your father's mare. Horses that are smart and sound and can command good prices. We could make a real business of it." "We will need a good stallion," Helena said thoughtfully, "and at least 3 or 4 mares to start. That is a lot of money. We will get there." He sounded confident, certain in a way that made Helena believe it too. "We will work hard and save and build something together. Something that is ours." They spent 2 more days at the line shack, living in a bubble of happiness and newlywed bliss. Then reality called them back. Decker had to return to work at the Running J, and Helena had responsibilities at her father's stable. They rode back to Calico together, and Decker helped Helena move her few possessions into the small cabin that Thomas Riggs had given them to live in on the ranch. The cabin was tiny, just 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, but it was theirs. Helena cleaned and organized while Decker was working, making curtains from flour sacks and arranging their meager furniture. It was not much, but she had never been happier than she was in that little house, waiting for her husband to come home each evening. Their first year of marriage was hard but good. They worked constantly, saving every penny they could spare. Decker took extra jobs when they were available, breaking horses for other ranches, doing carpentry work, anything to add to their savings. Helena helped her father at the stable on her days off, and the small salary he paid her went straight into their fund. The bay mare foaled in October, producing a strong colt with excellent conformation and the same intelligent eyes as his dam. Helena's father sold the colt for $300, more than the mare was worth, and gave Helena and Decker 10% as a finder's fee for tracking down the mare. It was a generous gesture, and they added it gratefully to their savings. By their first anniversary, they had enough money to buy 20 acres of scrubland east of Calico. The land was raw and undeveloped, covered in sage and creosote, but it had a year-round spring and good grazing. Decker and Helena spent every spare moment that fall and winter clearing land and building a small barn and corral. Thomas Riggs, who had grown fond of his best Cowboy, gave them lumber at cost and helped with the heavy work. Their house came next, a simple 2-room structure built with their own hands over the course of 6 months. It was not fancy, but it was solid and weatherproof, with a real stove and glass windows and a porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. Helena planted a garden behind the house, coaxing vegetables from the desert soil with determination and careful watering. By the time their second anniversary arrived, they had a home, a barn, 3 mares, and a young stallion that Decker was training. They also had something else. Helena was pregnant. She told him one evening in early spring as they sat on their porch, watching the desert bloom with wildflowers after the winter rains. Decker had just come in from working with the stallion, and Helena had poured him coffee and waited until he was settled before she spoke. "I have news," she said, trying to keep her voice casual. "Good news, I hope." Decker was watching the sunset, his profile peaceful and content. "I think so. I am almost certain, actually." Helena took a breath. "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." Decker's head whipped around, his eyes wide. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be. I have missed my monthly courses twice now, and I have been sick in the mornings." Helena laughed at his stunned expression. "Did you think we could share a bed every night and not eventually make a child?" "No, He set down his coffee and pulled her into his arms, his face buried in her hair. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Helena asked, suddenly nervous. They had talked about children in abstract terms, but facing the reality was different. "Happy?" Decker pulled back to look at her, and his eyes were shining with unshed tears. "Helena, I am terrified and thrilled and more grateful than I can express. We are going to be parents." They held each other as the stars came out, talking about names and plans and all the changes a baby would bring. Helena felt a deep contentment settle over her, a sense of rightness. This was what she had been meant for, this life with Decker on their small ranch, building something together. The pregnancy was not easy. Helena was sick for the first 4 months, barely able to keep food down, and Decker hovered over her with anxious concern. Her father rode out regularly to check on her, bringing food and supplies and sometimes just sitting with her while Decker worked. As she entered her 6th month, The sickness finally passed, but she grew huge and uncomfortable, her body struggling with the desert heat. Decker doted on her, doing all the heavy work around the ranch and refusing to let her lift anything heavier than a bucket. At night, he would rub her aching back and feet and read aloud from his book of poetry until she fell asleep. Helena had never felt so loved, so cherished, so protected. The baby came on a November night, 3 years and 2 months after the flood that had brought them together. Helena's water broke while she was making dinner, and Decker immediately rode to fetch the midwife from Calico. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Helena had never known such pain, such exhaustion, such fear that something would go wrong. But when the sun finally rose and the midwife placed a squalling infant in her arms, all the pain was forgotten. Helena looked down at her son, red and wrinkled and perfect, and felt her heart expand with love so fierce it took her breath away. "A boy," the midwife announced unnecessarily. 8 pounds if he is an ounce and healthy as a horse. Decker was beside her, his face streaked with tears, staring at his son with awe. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Helena, he is perfect." "What should we name him?" Helena asked, unable to look away from the baby's face. "Daniel," Decker said immediately. "Daniel Henry, after your father." Henry Jarvis, summoned by Decker during the night, arrived just after dawn. When he saw his grandson for the first time, the tough old horseman broke down and cried like a child. He held Daniel with shaking hands and whispered, "Your mother would have loved him. She would have been so proud." Daniel was an easy baby, content to sleep and eat and watch the world with solemn dark eyes that would eventually turn the same storm gray as his father's. Helena recovered quickly from the birth, and within weeks she was back to helping with the ranch work, carrying Daniel in a sling on her back as she did chores. They fell into a new rhythm, their lives now centered around their son. Decker would come in from working the horses to play with Daniel, making funny faces and talking to him in a soft voice that made Helena's heart melt. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, passing Daniel between them, marveling at every tiny change and development. "He has your nose," Helena observed one evening when Daniel was 3 months old. "Poor child," Decker teased, but his voice was warm with pride. "He has your determination, though. Look at how he fights to hold his head up." The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Their 3 mares all produced foals that spring, strong, healthy babies that Decker trained with infinite patience. Word spread about the quality of their horses, and buyers began coming from as far away as Los Angeles to look at their stock. They sold 2 yearlings for good prices, and the money went back into the business, buying more mares and improving their facilities. Life was not always easy. There were droughts that dried up their spring to a trickle, requiring them to haul water from town. There were years when foals died or horses got sick. There was the constant financial pressure of running a ranch, the worry that one bad season could wipe them out. But they faced every challenge together, and somehow they always found a way through. When Daniel was 2 years old, Helena discovered she was pregnant again. This time she was less nervous, more confident in her body's ability to grow and birth a baby. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and when their second son arrived on a warm May morning, the birth was quick and relatively painless. "Another boy," Helena said, laughing as she held the baby against her chest. "We are going to have a ranch full of cowboys." "Good," Decker said, kissing her sweaty forehead. "We need the help." They named him Jacob Samuel, the Samuel after the horse trainer who had helped Decker learn to control his anger all those years ago. Jacob was different from Daniel, loud and fussy and demanding, keeping them up at night with his cries. But he was also joyful, quick to smile, and as he grew, he filled their house with laughter. The years passed quickly, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growth of their sons. Daniel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved horses as much as his father. He could ride before he could walk properly, and by age 5, he was helping Decker train the young colts. Jacob was more adventurous, always climbing things and getting into trouble, but he had a gift with animals that amazed them all. Helena's father remained a constant presence in their lives, teaching his grandsons to read and do arithmetic, telling them stories about the early days of calico and the wild times before civilization came to the desert. He was in his 60s now, slowing down, and Helena knew he was thinking about the future of his stable. One evening when the boys were 6 and 4, Henry pulled Helena and Decker aside. "I want to make you an offer," he said. "I am getting too old to run the stable by myself. I want you to take it over, become my partners. We can merge your horse business with mine, have one operation instead of 2. When I am gone, it will all be yours anyway." It was a generous offer, and after much discussion, they agreed. They kept their ranch as a breeding operation and moved their training and sales business into town. The combined operation thrived, becoming the premier horse dealer in the Mojave. They bred horses for riding, for pulling wagons, for ranch work. Their reputation for quality spread across California, and wealthy buyers came from San Francisco and even as far as San Diego to purchase their stock. Life was good. Hard, but good. Helena and Decker worked side by side every day, raising their sons and building their business. They rarely talked about that day in the canyon, about the flood that had brought them together. But sometimes Helena would touch the turquoise pendant she still wore every day and remember the terror of the water, the strength of Decker riding into the current, the moment their eyes had met and she had known he would save her. "You ever regret it?" she asked him one night when they were lying in bed, the house quiet with the boys asleep. "Riding into that flood. You could have died. Not even for a moment." Decker pulled her closer, his body warm against hers. "That flood brought me you, it brought me our life. How could I regret that? It could have killed us both. But it did not." He kissed her temple, his hand resting on her hip. "We were meant to find each other, Helena. Meant to build this life together. I believe that." Helena turned in his arms, studying his face in the moonlight that filtered through their window. He was 35 now, weathered by sun and work, with fine lines around his eyes and threads of silver in his dark hair. But to her he was as handsome as the day she met him, maybe more so because now she knew every part of him, every story and scar and secret. "I love you," she said. "I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I thought that was impossible. I love you too." His hand cupped her face. "You saved me, Helena, not just that day in the canyon, but every day since. You gave me a reason to be better, to do better. You gave me a home." They made love slowly and quietly, mindful of the boys sleeping in the next room, and afterward Helena lay in Decker's arms and counted her blessings. She had a husband who loved her, healthy children, a successful business, a good life. She had survived being pinned against a canyon wall by floodwater, and in surviving, she had found everything she never knew she needed. The years continued to pass. Daniel grew into a lanky teenager who could handle the most difficult horses with his father's patience and skill. Jacob remained the wild one, charming and reckless by turns, but with a good heart underneath the mischief. Helena's father passed away peacefully in his sleep when the boys were 12 and 10, and they mourned him deeply even as they celebrated a life well lived. The business continued to thrive under Helena and Decker's management. They expanded the stable, hired 2 full-time hands to help with the work, and began breeding mules for the mining operations that still thrived in the mountains. They were respected in Calico, their opinion sought on matters relating to horses and livestock. The gossip that had once plagued Helena was long forgotten, replaced by admiration for the couple who had built something substantial from nothing. When Daniel turned 16, he asked his father to teach him everything about breaking horses. Decker spent the next 2 years passing on his knowledge, teaching his son not just the practical skills but the philosophy behind them. Patience over force, understanding over domination, respect for the animal's intelligence and spirit. Helena watched them work together in the corral and felt profound gratitude that their son would carry on Decker's gentle methods. Jacob was less interested in the training side of the business, more fascinated by breeding and bloodlines. He studied their stock records obsessively, tracking which mares produced the best foals when bred to which stallions. At 14, he convinced his parents to let him start a breeding program specifically for speed, arguing that racing was becoming popular in Los Angeles and they should get ahead of the market. His instincts proved correct, and within 5 years their racing stock was commanding premium prices. Helena turned 45 in the spring of 1900, 17 years after the flood. She stood in the doorway of their ranch house one morning, watching Decker and their sons work a young filly in the corral, and marveled at how full her life had become. The scared, desperate young woman pinned against the canyon wall would never have believed this was possible. "Mama," Jacob called, waving at her. "Come watch. She is finally accepting the saddle without bucking." Helena walked down to the corral, and Decker made room for her at the fence. His arm went around her waist automatically, a gesture of affection worn smooth by years of repetition. They stood together and watched their sons work the filly, offering quiet advice when asked, but mostly just enjoying the sight of their children doing what they loved. "They are good boys," Decker said softly. "We did something right. We did everything right." Helena leaned into him. "Look at what we built. Look at our life." "I know." His arm tightened around her. "Sometimes I still cannot believe how lucky I am. That I happened to be riding through that canyon on that exact day, that copper heard you over the water, that the rope found you on the first throw, so many things that could have gone differently. But they did not." Helena tilted her face up to kiss his jaw. "We found each other and we built this. Together." That night, after the boys had gone to bed, Helena and Decker sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The desert stretched out around them, peaceful and familiar, the same landscape that had nearly killed her and had instead delivered her to the love of her life. The stars wheeled overhead, brilliant in the clear sky, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage and earth. "Do you remember the night in the line shack?" Helena asked. "After the flood, every detail." Decker's hand found hers. "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met, and the most beautiful, even soaked and half drowned." Helena laughed. "I looked like a drowned rat." "You looked like a survivor, like someone who would not quit no matter what." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "I think I fell in love with you right then, watching you refuse to give up." "I fell in love with you the moment you rode into that current," Helena admitted. "I knew that anyone crazy enough to risk their life for a stranger was someone special, someone worth keeping." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands clasped, shoulders touching. 20 years of marriage had taught them that words were not always necessary, that sometimes the best conversations happened in the spaces between speech. "I want to take you somewhere," Decker said suddenly. "Tomorrow, just the two of us. The boys can handle the ranch for one day." "Where?" Helena asked, curious. "You will see." The next morning, they saddled 2 horses and rode north into the desert. Helena recognized the route after a while, realized where he was taking her. The canyon where she had nearly died, where he had saved her, where their story had begun. They had not been back since that day, both of them avoiding it without ever discussing why. But now, Decker led them directly to it, and they stood at the canyon entrance looking down at the dry wash that had once been a raging torrent. It looked harmless now, peaceful, just another desert arroyo carved by centuries of occasional water. Hard to believe it had nearly killed her. "Why did you bring me here?" Helena asked. "Because I wanted to stand in this place with you and remember." Decker dismounted and helped her down. "I wanted to mark how far we have come. That girl pinned against the wall never imagined she would have all this. That cowboy on a borrowed horse never thought he deserved to be happy. But we found each other here in this place, and we built a life that neither of us could have dreamed." Helena felt tears prick her eyes. "We did not we? We did." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "And I wanted to stand here and promise you again, the way I promised you on our wedding day. I promise to love you until I take my last breath. I promise to stand beside you through everything that comes. I promise to be the man you deserve every single day." "I promise the same," Helena whispered, her face pressed against his chest. "I promise to love you and choose you and build this life with you today and every day after." They stood there in the canyon, 20 years after it had nearly destroyed them, and renewed the vows that had shaped their life. Then they climbed back on their horses and rode home together, to the sons and the ranch and the business and the life they had created from a moment of terror and a choice to be brave. Daniel married at 23, bringing home a sweet girl from Barstow who fit into the family as if she had always been there. Jacob married 2 years later, and soon Helena and Decker had grandchildren to spoil and love. The ranch passed to the boys gradually, Decker stepping back from the daily work as his body grew older and more tired, teaching his sons everything he knew about horses and business and life. Helena and Decker grew old together, weathered by desert sun and hard work, but still strong, still in love. They remained active in the business well into their 60s, offering advice and expertise, but their greatest joy became their grandchildren. 5 in total, 3 girls and 2 boys, all of them carrying pieces of Helena and Decker in their faces and personalities. On Helena's 67th birthday, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren, friends and neighbors, all came to honor the woman who had built so much from so little. Helena stood on the porch of the house she and Decker had built with their own hands and looked out at the gathering with profound contentment. Decker came to stand beside her, moving slower now but still steady. He took her hand, his grip as sure as it had been 40 years ago when he pulled her from the flood. "Happy birthday, love," he said. "Happy life," she replied, the words they had traded on her birthday every year since they married. "Happy life," he agreed. They stood together watching their family, their legacy, everything they had built together. The floodwater had pinned her against a canyon wall, and the rancher's cowboy had ridden straight into the current, and from that moment of terror and courage had come everything that mattered. Love and family and a life well lived. Helena leaned her head on Decker's shoulder and smiled. The desert wind whispered through the sage, carrying the smell of home, and she knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single moment of the journey that had brought them here. Their story had started with water and fear, and a stranger brave enough to risk everything. It had become a life of love and partnership and joy. And as the sun set over the desert they had called home for more than 4 decades, Helena and Decker Zane stood together, still holding hands, still in love, still grateful for the flood that had brought them together and the courage that had saved them both.